Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Okay, so continuing with our Python for Data Science playlist, in today's video we are going to talk about functions in Python. What are different functions, what are the type of functions, like then we will be looking at some of the examples of functions. Then we will go ahead and understand what are methods, what are different objects in Python. We will be also looking at what are some of the things that we should keep in mind while dealing with methods and objects in Python. Then at last, we will also be saying like what are packages, what is the need and use of packages, and how to use different packages in a correct manner. Okay, so let's jump right in. Right, so what are functions? So simply, functions can be defined as a piece of reusable code aimed at solving a particular task. Right, so basically, let's say if you want to do something repeatedly, then you write some piece of code, right? And that piece of code is now called a functions. For example, let's say you want to know every time and again, you want to know like what is the data type of this variable that I have created. So you write a certain like line of code and say, okay, and I will name this function as type. So every time you call this function, it will return certain output. So it is a piece of reusable code that is aimed at solving a particular task. You can write the function once and keep using it again and again for doing the similar task. Like if you want to, declare a variable with a list, and then you want to know, okay, so what is the type of this variable? So it will return list. Let's say you want to calculate square root, you can write a function of square root, and every time you need to calculate a square root of 5, 10, 15, whatever number, it will just return the square root of that number, right? Functions can be mostly two types: built in. So for example, functions that already come built in with Python, right? So once you install Python, like these functions, you can directly use it right away, right? So you don't need to do anything extra. If you have Python, you have access to these functions. Then there are some functions that are dependent upon your need of a data as a data scientist on a day-to-day basis, and you can write functions on your own. So such functions are called user defined. So for example, let's say for a particular problem you want to know that in a particular list what are the different odd numbers. That list can change and whatever, but since it is a piece of reusable code that you want to write, so you can write a function which returns odd numbers from a list. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some of the examples of built-in functions, right? So for example, let me create a variable called marks with which has list with 5 different elements in it, right? So if I run this, so marks is basically a list with 5 different elements. Now, one of the built-in function of Python is maximum. So if I want to, get to know what is the maximum of this list, I just run this and it returns, okay, so the maximum value of this list is 92, right? Another way is, using the round function. So, and the syntax of round function is you write round and then parentheses, the number you want to round to, and comma, the precision, basically the number of decimal places that you want to round it to. And if you don't write anything here, so by default it will round it to the nearest integer, right? So for example, pi, like 22 by 7 or 3.14, like non-terminating irrational number. So if I write round pi to 4 decimal places and run this code, so it will return me 3.1429, right? Also, there is small tip here. If you ever want to do a quick look of what all parameters built-in functions take, use help function, right? So for example, how did I know like what is the syntax of round? Like let's say you are working on something and you realize that, okay, I remember there is a function called round, but I don't know what all parameters it takes, right? So what you can do is you can use the help function to know about the syntax. So if I run this, so it will let you know. So help on built-in function, it is a built-in function, it takes the number and then second place is n digits, so the number of places or number of decimal places you want it to round to, right? There is another way to do this same thing. Instead of writing help, you can just write a question mark and the name of the built-in function here, right? And if you run it, it will do the same thing, right? So round, number, and digits, none, and like basically similar stuff. Okay. Okay, now let's go ahead and discuss what are methods. To understand methods in Python, first thing that we should know, or we should have prior knowledge of, what are Python objects, right? So when you create a certain data type, right, you are technically creating an object. In layman terms, what we say is that we are creating a variable which has some data type value, right? But what we actually mean is we are creating a Python object named variable, in that particular variable, which contains that data type. So for example, let's take this example, right? So marks is equal to this list of 5 different elements, right? So in layman terms, what do you say? I am creating a list called marks. But in technicality, what I mean by that is I am creating a Python object named marks which contains list data type, right? So you understand what I am trying to say here. I am creating a Python object called marks which contains the list data type, right? Methods are the functions associated with these objects. So once you create a Python object of a certain data type, then the functions related to those objects are called methods. Example, a list object. So this is a list object, right? Marks is a list object. List object has a method called index, which basically tells you what is the index of a certain value in a particular list. So for example, in this list, like I want to know what is the index of 92. So what I can do is marks. So marks is a Python object, right? Python object and its method, right? So dot index is the method of a Python list object where I want to know the index of a particular thing. So when I run this, it is 4. So index is 4, right? Similarly, let me create another Python string object called channel, which has this value, right? So everyday data science. And a string object has a method called upper, which basically transforms everything to uppercase, right? So if when I run this, so everything is now uppercase. Now, we learned about how to know the syntax of certain built-in functions, right? Now when I do help upper, right, you remember what I said was methods are functions. So basically upper is also functions associated with these objects. So this should return me, right? So help, because it returns, tells you more about the particular function, but it says name upper is not defined, because upper function is associated with a string object. So that is why when I write help string dot upper, then it will tell me, okay, so this is a method descriptor, return a copy of the string converted to uppercase. So you see, like, this is important. Now each object, depending upon its type, has specified methods associated with it. Like for example, channel, this is a channel is a string object, right? A string object also has a method called replace, where you type in what do you want to replace and what do you want to replace it with. So if I run this, it will, instead of having everyday data science, it is now everyday data analyst, right? Marks, right? So marks is a list, right? So it is a list object. List object do not have an index called replace. So if I run this and 92 is one of the elements of marks object and I want to replace it by 95, if I run this, it will give me an error. So it says list object has no attribute or no method called replace. So you understand, like, this is important. Also, what we need to keep in mind is that some method calls don't change the object they are called on, but some do. For example, right, so this is a list object called marks. right, which has these values. And when I try to find out what is the index of 92, right, so I called a method on this list object and try to know the index, right, so it will return me 4. And now if I look at marks, it is the same, right, so same 5 values in this. But now on the list object, if I call another method called append, right, if I run this, it seems like nothing is happening. But now if I look at marks, it has a 6th value as well, right. The append is a method of list object which changes the object, right, so marks object is now changed. Now it has 6 elements. But some methods, for example index of a list object, do not change the object, right, so after doing the index it remains the same. Keep that in mind. Okay, now let's move to what are packages, right? Now to understand what packages are, let us think about, so will it be beneficial to include all the Python functions and methods that have been written till date from the inception of Python in one place? No, because you will end up not using majority of those almost every time, right? Because every time you are writing some code, you are trying to do a specific task, right? So for example, like to understand this even more, think of, everything in your computer can be done with one application. Like, so suppose there is an application which can do everything. Like you can take notes, you can browse internet, you can, edit videos, listen to music, make presentation, etc., etc. in every one single application. Now, every time you open that application, will you do everything? Will you, every time you open the application, will you make notes? Will you browse internet? Will you edit videos? Will you, make presentation? Like, will you do everything every time you open it? Obviously not, right? So, what do? Is we, instead of having one application which can do everything, why do we not have different applications? So there is a notepad to take notes, there is Google Chrome, Safari, etc. to browse internet. So similar Python functions and methods are combined together and put in a package, right? So for example, let's say you want to do data visualization. So matplotlib is a package which has all the functions and methods that will help you to do data visualizations. If you want to do machine learning, scikit-learn is a package which has all the functions and methods that will help you in doing machine learning, right? Okay. Now, to use a package for the first time, you need to install it and then import it. And from the second time, you can directly import it, right? So like how to install a package. So you just write pip install and the name of the package. Now, once you install that, let's say I want to do data visualization. So I tell Python import this package, right? So import matplotlib, right? So it will take some time, right? And then it will import the package. Now let's say I want to create a histogram of the the list object called marks with 5 different values, right? So remember list object called marks with 5 different values. I am using this package method hist, to create the histogram. So if you see here, a histogram is made, right? Now, there is one thing that you need to be careful. Now, like by common sense, if you think, if I import the entire package, then everything that is inside this package, like it should be there, right? So once I do import, this package matplotlib.pyplot, and then hist is a function of this package, right? So if I do hist on hist, basically create a histogram, right? So hist of marks, it should return me a histogram, right? But it does not. It says name hist is not defined. What is going on? So if you import the whole package, you need to specifically specify what part of that package or what function or what module of that package you want to use. So but if you don't want to do that, right, so what you can do is you can do selective import. So instead of importing everything in the package, let's say you only want to make a histogram, so what you can do is from that package import a certain thing, right? So import hist. Now if I do this hist marks, it will give me a histogram, right? So you understand, you need to be careful, like what is the difference between selective importing, their advantages, versus importing the entire thing, right? So it seems advantageous, but think of it in a certain way, right? So let's say you are writing 1000 lines of code, and on the very first line you imported certain thing, and on 950th line you write hist marks, and once you write it, it's okay. But let's say after 3 months you come back and you are just going through your code, and when you reach line 950, it is very difficult that you will remember that what you imported in the very beginning. So that is why, that is one disadvantage, that people who are reading your code might not see that, okay, this hist is basically a function called from matplotlib, a package called matplotlib. So it's better to use the entire thing at one place, right? So it is better to do this instead of this option, right? But just wanted to share that yes, this is possible, right? Okay, so I hope this video was useful. Let me know, guys, if this video was useful. I hope you got a better clear understanding of what are functions, what are methods, what are objects, what are packages, why do we use packages, the concept of packages, where it came from, etc, etc, right? Let me know in the comment section if this video was useful, and I will see you guys in the next tutorial.